Welcome to the Learn From Everyone podcast. I'm your host, Tim, and today I have Regina. She is a teacher's aide on her way to studying to become a teacher, and we've got some really interesting topics to talk about. She's a teacher's aide in a special needs classroom.
Because, again, routine is really the most important factor. One thing that is unique about children with ADHD and autism. Oh yeah, like there was one time when we actually had, oh my gosh, it was a crazy day where we actually had to bring students, like there was one student that was just totally flipping out. It required like 5 adults in the classroom just to manage this one student. Towards the middle of the year, I started noticing like the students in my classroom were more respectful to adults and other students than most of the other students in the school.
And why don't we start with, you were trying to, when we were talking a little bit earlier, you were clarifying kind of what more or less what it means to be a teacher's aide. Even though you are in the classroom and you are, I would use the term teaching, but technically that is not the correct term. So I will let you take it from there.
Yeah, so first of all, it's great to be on this podcast or show or whatever. But second of all, yeah, so I'm a teacher's aide, and so even because I do not have my teacher certification yet, I am not allowed to teach new material. But if there's material that's already been taught by the teacher, then I'm allowed to like clarify or teach new strategies and things like that, as long as the material has already been taught. So teaching, but not teaching officially.
Semantics. Well, it's the school system, right?
Right. Exactly. And the main job that I have is really classroom management, making sure that all of the students are doing what they're supposed to be doing and keeping the students safe. Because with special education, sometimes there are outbursts, and sometimes we have to transport students to another room or anything like that, just to make sure we're keeping the students safe as our students are learning how to manage their emotions appropriately. So that's kind of my job.
I'm gonna stop you for just a sec because I want to delve into that a little bit more, because I don't think most people realize the extreme that behavior can reach in a special needs classroom. Because we were talking about this a little bit the other day. Are you comfortable with giving any, clearly not name names, but examples of behavior and things that you have to navigate with the students to allow them to be more productive in the classroom?
Yes. So I guess one example would be sometimes, well, first of all, we get new students throughout the school year. So that makes it really challenging to keep a routine. But we try really hard to keep the routine because that's really beneficial to all children, but especially SPED kids. But when we do get a new student and they're suddenly thrown into a new classroom and stuff like that, which actually happened this past year, we had a student come in and she was trying to learn about our classroom rules and all of these different things within just a few days or a couple weeks, whereas all of the other students had several months to get used to it. And so then it can be very overwhelming, and that can translate into sometimes very violent behaviors because the students, these are elementary school students with special needs. And so
they already have a ton of energy, and you combine some unique character traits.
That, and sometimes it's harder for them to communicate in a like neurotypical way, where it's, for some kids, they might be able to say, I am sad. Whereas with somebody who doesn't understand their emotions, it's like, I'm feeling this negative emotion. What do I do? I'm going to let it out any way that I can because I do not have the tools to say I am sad. And so that can translate into, sometimes the kids just kind of try to run away. We've had students run out of the classroom before and we had to chase them around the school, all of that stuff. Sometimes students try to actually get outside of the school. But really the more intense behaviors can turn into biting, scratching. I even had, like, we have these partitions to kind of give students some privacy if they need some time to like cool down or anything like that. I've had those thrown at me, things hit my face, all of that stuff. So it can get very intense. And so our job is really just to protect the other students and the student that is having a meltdown in those events. But thankfully, we like as we get more of a connection with the students, behaviors seem to kind of go down as the student learns the routines. Because again, routine is really the most important factor, I think.
I've
when
noticed
it comes
that as well, it seems like. And kind of to tie in there, a lot of people may not know what the word neurodivergent means or what it means in this context. Do you mind give us a quick breakdown of that?
Well, so neurodivergent is a very broad term that basically, I don't know the scientific like definition of it, but it's basically just anybody that doesn't think, quote, normally, which I don't really
things like
the terms
autism,
like things like that. Yeah,
ADHD, those sort of things, those diagnoses would fall under neurodivergent.
Right. So neurodivergent could be autism, which is like an entire spectrum, dyslexia,
That I didn't know.
And ADHD, OCD, like all of these different things fall under neurodivergent. So pretty much everybody I've met is somehow neurodivergent. I mean, it's just the reality. And so that's where I personally don't like the terms neurotypical and neurodivergent, because really a very few people that I've met
are normal,
which doesn't make sense. But yeah, so neurodivergent is basically anything that's different about the brain.
Okay. Different than like the average brain, I guess, or whatever they define as the average brain.
Right, whatever they define as the average brain. I don't know who comes up with these definitions, but they're total, like, I mean, not total bogus, but like...
They're very blanket terms that get thrown around a lot, it seems like.
Exactly. But yeah, so it's a very interesting position to be in.
Oh, yeah. It would seem to me you get the most... not quite extreme, but most energetic versions of a child. The most not even free willed. The children who are going to most impulsive, I guess, would be more accurate.
Yes, I think that would be a pretty accurate way to put it. I'd say some of the students are impulsive, and some are just we call it emotional disturbance, which is like...
You have a funny term for that.
Yeah, we call it ED, which I don't like, but anyway, it's emotional disturbance. And basically that's
now
just like...
nobody's going to forget.
If the child has faced any kind of trauma that influences their behaviors and stuff like that. Which actually leads me into one issue that I see in the education system is that students that are classified as ED, I'm not laughing at that. Students that are classified as having an emotional disturbance, you would think that they'd receive regular counseling to overcome that, but they don't. It's just assumed that they will, I guess, get over it, which is concerning because yes, children are insanely resilient, but if something is so severe that a child is classified as emotionally disturbed, then they should be receiving regular counseling. And yes, maybe...
Yeah, and somebody to help give them the tools to work through it.
Yeah, exactly. Where that's kind of what our job is, not to be a counselor, because that's not what we are trained in, um, but to help them with understanding their emotions and understanding how to deal with the emotions. But I mean, if they're truly emotionally disturbed, then they need a professional counselor to be working with them. But it seems that the only time the school counselor comes in to talk to these kids is when there is an emotional outburst.
Once it's already been too late, there was no...
Exactly.
The event has already happened. There was no prevention from getting there.
Exactly. And I understand, like, there's only one school counselor in each school. And I mean, except for like huge high schools, like I think my high school had like 2 counselors or something. But like in an elementary school, there's typically like one school counselor for
How big is your school
hundreds.
For reference?
I think it's like 400 kids. So it's not big. It's a pretty small school, you know, but still one counselor trying to take care of all these different students.
400 to 1.
Right. And the counselor also has all these other responsibilities, like the schools are incorporating social emotional learning into the curriculum. And so that's part of the counselor's job now, is going to classrooms, teaching students about social emotional learning. And so there's even less time for the counselor to actually counsel.
Yeah, it seems like that's kind of a divergence of their role.
Yeah, but I mean, it makes sense that the counselor's doing this, because I mean, their whole thing is mental health, emotional, all of that. So it makes sense. But at the same time, what do we do when, like, we need you to help a student that is in crisis that we are not trained to help, and you are busy teaching a lesson? You know, it's like, how are we supposed to navigate?
There's no fallback or like, there's nobody to help when help was needed the most, it seems like.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's definitely one issue. And again, it's not the fault of the counselor. They have been burdened with too much to where they can't accurately help the child, which I think is true of pretty much everybody in the school system. All of the teachers, counselors, administration, pretty much everybody, I think, is overburdened with all of these like side quests, essentially.
Yeah.
And so we can't actually get to the main goal of teaching the students. I'm not sure how it is in a general education classroom, which is just the regular classroom. All I know is a self-contained special needs behavioral adjustment classroom.
Yeah.
But we have different platforms for reporting incidents and restraints that have happened. And we also have to be tracking each student's behavior every 15 minutes on a tracker to assess which specific behaviors they're struggling with in 15-minute increments. They want us to be checking.
How do you have time to do anything else?
Exactly.
I mean, how many students is that, for reference?
Well, so my classroom this past year, thankfully, we only had, I think at most we had like 8, but still
logging like, every 15 minutes behaviors of 8 different kids, that seems time consuming.
Yes.
What does it help to log all of this?
That's a good question. And that's actually kind of brings me to this point, the teachers are just kind of, the district doesn't talk to the teachers about what would be helpful. It's really just, oh, hey, here's this new form of tracking to see how the students are progressing. Do it. And
they don't
then,
take into account how time-consuming adding yet another thing on is, and whether it actually
exactly,
produces results.
exactly, and they never actually take away the former, like the previous forms of tracking behaviors. And so, I mean, the point of tracking the behaviors is to see patterns and to see like, oh, this kid has been on green, because we have a green, yellow, red system, which is pretty self-explanatory. Red is bad, green is good. So everybody starts on green, and then if there's an incident, then we go to like yellow, red. And so
could you actually go into a little bit
visual...
more detail on that? Because that's kind of interesting. What, for example, what would be a reason for a kid to go from green to yellow, and then from yellow to red?
Right. So everyone starts on green, which just means that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, following all the rules, staying on track, or like staying focused on their work, being kind to others, or at the very least not being mean to everybody else. Basically just overall doing what they're supposed to be doing. Yellow is when a student has broken the rules or has started to get off task or be disruptive or any number of things that's just like considered bad. I put that on quotes because that's a very subjective term. And there are some things where I'm like, okay, the kid's a little squirmy, calm down, like this.
Yeah. So
it
depends on the teacher too. They can be a little bit, some teachers are like, really, you're not paying enough attention. And what are they, I'll ask this question in a minute, but continue.
Yeah. So, when a student is starting to act up, then they get one warning, basically just like, hey, remember, this is the behavior you're supposed to be exhibiting, and you are not doing that right now. And then if we give them a second warning, or like not really a warning at this point, because then we're changing the color, but if we have to remind them twice of the expectations, then they go from green to yellow, which is basically like, okay, they should know by now what the expectation is, because we want to give them a bit of the benefit of the doubt. Like sometimes a kid is excited about something and they forget about the rules, so in that moment they might not,
kids, especially in elementary school,
might not know the rules. Like they should know the rules, but they might not know the rules because they're so excited, so we want to give them a little bit of we want to give them a chance to correct their behavior. And so then if we give them a chance and they refuse to correct their behavior, we move them to yellow, which is kind of like a wake-up call, going like, oh, I want to get back on green. And so we have it in a tracker, and we on the computer so that we can track patterns and everything. We also have it we have the student's name on something. In my classroom, it's like these little birds, and then the birds fly from green to yellow, and then the kids are like, oh, I want my bird to be back on green. So then they fix their behavior.
So it's a visual thing posted somewhere for each student?
Yes. And so there's one green, yellow, red thing, poster in each classroom. And each classroom looks different. Some people have stoplights or the traffic lights. Some have just red, yellow, and green pieces of paper. Some are a little more creative. But yeah, so it looks different for each classroom. But in my classroom, there are these little birds that have each student's name on it. And then we switch it from green to yellow. And then if the student either escalates their behavior at that point, or we still have to keep correcting them, then they move to red. So after 3 corrections, they turn to red.
All right. And how do you use those, the red, green, yellow, as in, this seems like it's both used for tracking, and from a little bit of what you're saying, you also use it to help modify and correct behavior. So how do you use it? Because this seems more than just the log every 15 minutes. It's just a bunch of writing down. This seems like it's an actively used tool to help these students be more functional in public.
Which it is very useful in the classroom, and having the visual like the visual tools. It's just the tracking, like the actual official tracking, that gets exhausting, and it takes up so much time. Whereas it's easier to just jot down a note or to write in a system like, oh yeah, at this time, Bobby, like, I don't know, just some random name. At this time,
Joe.
Bobby threw a chair across the room. Like, or at this time, Bobby decided to get up and start running around the classroom instead of paying attention in class. Rather than having the 15-minute increments, because then that doesn't even match up with when the behavior.
It's not incident related. It's
right,
just an
exactly.
arbitrary. It seems like an arbitrary time scale that somebody thought would be a good idea, but maybe never actually tried.
Exactly. And another thing with this tracker is that the district is like, oh, you can't go from green to red. You have to do green, yellow, red. And I'm like, okay, what if these behaviors come up in 5 minutes and you only have a 15-minute window here? What am I supposed to do with that? Like, I can't do that. So the data there that they're trying to collect is not accurate, and it's a waste of time. So anyway, but yeah, so in the classroom, having the visual of like, where's my bird? Is it on red? Is it on green? Let's look over at that wall. Oh no, it's on red. I want to fix that so that my bird is on green. That's helpful. And what we found in my classroom is even more helpful is that each student has like a money jar, and it's plastic for safety. Anyway,
makes sense.
Yeah, so it's plastic. They have a money jar with their name on it, and each assignment that they complete, they get a quarter. Play money, obviously. I'm not giving them my money.
Fair enough. But nobody gets paid enough.
Yeah, no. Like teachers maybe, but teachers' aid, like, no. I could be getting paid the same at Home Depot for a lot less hazardous work.
But this makes more, but it feels like it means more, it would appear.
Yeah. This is more fulfilling, yes. But anyway, back to the point. So we have it to where each assignment that the student does, they receive a quarter. If they turn the assignment in on time, which is basically just, were you staying focused the whole time? Because if they're staying focused the whole time and it's just taking them longer to complete an assignment, we're like, okay, we're going to cut down the length of this assignment for you, because we don't want to burn our kids out. But yeah, so basically, were you staying focused? Did you get it done during the designated time block? Were you copying answers, or were you actually coming up with your own? Like, all of these different factors come into account when we decide whether the student gets a quarter, a dime, a nickel, even a couple pennies. Like, all of these different factors. And we explain to the students, like, hey, you're only getting a dime for this assignment because you were, you wasted half of your time before you even started working. And so since
it incentivizes them to work effectively.
Exactly. And it's kind of, the thought process there is also like, in our jobs, we get paid for the amount of time that we're working. Or like, if you work on commission, you get paid for the job you do. And so it's like a physical incentive. It's not just like some arbitrary like grade, because let's face it, these kids, they don't care. Like, I mean, yeah, they might care, like, oh yay, I did a good job, but it's more solidified when you have a physical object, a physical reward that they can use. So anyway,
and speaking of use, what can they use this for?
Yeah, so at the end of each week, we set up a classroom store. And so they can buy toys or snacks. Obviously, like, none of the snacks have things that the students are allergic to. We take all that into account. And so they can buy like snacks, different things. So one thing that is really cool is that the district actually provides different prizes to give out to like students that are excelling and stuff.
Yeah.
And basically they're like, hey, here's all these prizes. Do with it as you will. And basically so that the teachers don't have to spend as much money on the
stuff. And it's not like
good.
It costs the school district that much. And I would imagine I could see that being an incredibly effective tool, especially for smaller children who need a little bit more incentive. I mean, there's no reason not to incentivize everybody, but smaller children need a little bit more to get them to want to do stuff.
Absolutely. Especially smaller children who are neurodivergent, because one thing that is unique about children with ADHD and autism, which there is a lot of overlap there, is that there's got to be a tangible thing. Like there has to be an actual reward or a reason for doing it. Otherwise, it's like, I don't want to do this. I'm not going to get anything out of it. So why would I do it just because you told me to do it? That doesn't make sense.
And I mean, let's be honest. Humans operate like that anyway. Nobody goes to a job to work for free.
Right, exactly. But it's even more so in autism and ADHD. And so that's one thing where it's like we try to be very conscious of that, you know. But anyway, yeah, so we have a classroom store. And the way that this ties into the red, yellow, green is that if a student lands on red, then we remove a quarter from their jar. And for some students, we have to remove the quarter, and for others, we're like, go remove a quarter and bring it to me. And so then they actually have to do it. And then that makes them realize, like, oh, yeah. I mean, for example, there was one time at recess where there was a student that was talking about how he wanted to jump off of the swing. And I'm like, no, don't jump off the swing, which, okay. From an adult perspective, I'm like, I like jumping off the swings too, you know? The difference is your parents entrusted your care to me right now.
Yeah, like, and who gets in trouble at the end of the day?
Yeah, if you wanna go do that on your free time, like with your parents' permission, do that, but not at school. So I heard him saying like, "Oh, I'm gonna jump off the swing," and I'm like, "Do not jump off the swing." And I made sure he heard me, and then he decided to jump off the swing, and I'm like, "Okay, well, even though this was just one action, because you knew the expectation." And you did it anyway, and it could have potentially been very dangerous. So the severity was a little more. I'm like, you are having a 3-minute timeout right now, while everybody else gets to keep playing, and you are on red. So when we get back to the classroom, you need to, or I actually asked him, I was like, so what do you need to do when you get back to the classroom? And he's like, I need to take a quarter out of my jar. And I'm like, he just weighed the pros and cons of jumping off. And I'm like, okay, hey. I mean, that's...
And the thing is, though, the kids now cognitively understand that there are consequences for actions. And that is something that is really important for people to learn, because there are consequences to every action. And you have to learn that.
Exactly. And that's where
he chose to make the decision.
Yeah. And I look at this as a win, because he knew what he did was wrong. He understood why it was wrong, and he understood the consequences of his actions. And he was just like, okay with that, which is great, because at the beginning of the year, he was like, what? No, I don't have to do that, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, so seeing that growth, like, yeah, you still made the decision, but you also took accountability, which is honestly a lot more mature than most adults, I will say.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your classroom, with kids who should struggle more, seem to get the learning that is more skipped in a lot of other classrooms that is more important. I mean, that example right there of learning consequences, I feel like just maybe it doesn't happen as much in other classrooms.
I don't think it does. I think that they try, but keep in mind, in my classroom, we've got 8 kids.
Yeah, and more than one adult, right?
Yes. We've got 1 teacher and 2 aides. And the reason for that is because in the special needs classrooms, there have to always be at least 2 people in the classroom. And that's in case of an incident so that there's a witness. And also there have been times when there's like 3 students having emotional outbursts at a time, and we're having to like manage that.
Yeah, there's only so much one person can do by themselves.
Oh yeah. And like there was one time when we actually had oh my gosh, it was a crazy day where we actually had to bring students. Like there was one student that was just totally gone mentally, like just flipping out. It required like 5 adults in the classroom just to manage this one student. And so all of the other students, we moved over to another classroom, and then another student started having a meltdown. And these were also the 2 strongest students. Anyway,
not ideal.
And it required 4 people to maintain to take care of that kid. And we also had a kid that had a seizure at the time, and so we had to manage that and bring everybody else to another classroom. And it was like, what are we supposed to do here?
When it rains, it pours.
It was an exhausting week that week. Oh my goodness. Anyway, but yeah, so we definitely have some special kids. But that's basically, that's why we need multiple adults there, is in case of events like that. So usually once we get the routines established and everything, we're good. And like it could be managed with just 1, maybe 2 people. But in the special event that something does blow up like that, we need all the people that we can get. And so having at least 3 people is like really important.
Does one blow up outburst often trigger another?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. In the class that I had this past year, the kids would actually, when one kid was having a meltdown, a lot of the times the students were like, well, I guess I can't have a meltdown right now because the teachers are busy. And so they would actually like wait until that kid is done having a meltdown, and then they'll have a meltdown, which is exhausting. But it's like, okay, thank you for waiting to throw things across the room, I guess.
Is it a little bit about attention then? Because they get a lot of attention when that happens?
Yes. So that is one thing, is that we've noticed that there was one student in particular that was really on top of everything. And so he wasn't really getting as much attention. And then we were like, dude, why is he acting out? And then we started looking at it and we're like, so then we, once we realized that, we started giving more positive attention to him, and like really, I mean, it's a learning thing for the adults and the students, you know, because we have to constantly be adapting, you know.
It seems like the skills that you're putting into practice here, like a more extreme version of the average person, where everything's dialed up to in a more extreme, are still lessons that if it works in this situation, it's probably very applicable in every other situation. Because if it can work with kids who are more at an extreme level of like energy and impulsiveness and just emotional distress, that if the techniques you use in this classroom, they probably would work well in all classrooms. What do you think?
I think that's a pretty accurate. I think that's pretty accurate to say, because even in general education classrooms, I think that there are a lot of students that either are neurodivergent and it's just not so severe that they have to be in the special education classroom, or it's just children want attention and they need attention to grow and thrive.
People do.
And yeah, people, but especially children. And so And they also need a lot of freedom to express themselves. But I feel like there's a lot of, like, adults just assume that children know the rules and know how to interact with people.
They're measuring kids by adult standards a lot of the time. Because as an adult,
Exactly.
yeah, I know the rules. And if I chose to do something differently, it's because I chose to. But like, kids just forget.
Yeah. I think that having social lessons, like what they're trying to do with bringing the counselor into classrooms and like having social emotional learning, I think that that is a good thing. But I think that they need to do it on a larger scale. But that would involve a different, it needs to be implemented differently, I guess.
Yeah.
So that
Not
the counselor
one
is
counselor
available.
for 400 students.
Right. And so that the counselor is available to counsel students. But I think that all kids need to learn the social skills of how to have polite conversations with people, how to interact with people in a respectful way, and how to disagree with people. And in our behavioral adjustment classroom, we have time set aside to specifically practice those skills. And
I think that time should
explicit-
be in every classroom. Those skills are more important, honestly, than knowing your times tables. If we're being really honest, I would rather deal with somebody who's can handle their emotions and speak with somebody than somebody who knows their times tables perfectly. And that person is going to be more employable, more socially acceptable. And yet, the only class that's getting taught is in the special education classes, which is odd to me.
And that's where, towards the middle of the year, I started noticing, like, the students in my classroom were more respectful to adults and other students than most of the other students in the school. Now, I'm not trash talking any kids right now, okay?
No.
Like,
it's just an example of using methods that work.
Yes.
And using them consistently with an even more extreme population.
Yes.
So if you can get your kids who should absolutely, on paper, should be the ones being, disrespectful and out of control, if they're the ones by halfway through the year acting with a higher level of respect, clearly what you're teaching is working and probably should be applied across the board. Because imagine if all students were better behaved.
Yeah. And that's where it's like, ideally, we would be able to implement these strategies across the board. But with the resources we have, it is not possible. And I think that's one of the major problems with the education, industry. I don't know.
It's the system. It hasn't changed. It doesn't seem like it's changed fundamentally much in 100 years. It's the same basic idea. And the focus is still on skills that are not, from my outside looking in and just having been in school, they're focusing on skills that would lead you to success 100, 150 years ago being a factory worker. But the world's more complicated now, and people skills above anything are probably more important than most anything else. And it's not something gets touched on except in very specialized classes.
Exactly. And the focus is not on, and I'm just talking about like education as a whole, not on specifically SPED. The focus is not on learning. The focus is on compliance, and just obeying whatever your superior, in this case a teacher or a principal, tells you to do without questioning it, which is a very scary thing to be teaching.
It used to be semi-functional, but the world is too complicated now. For the people who get paid the most are the ones that can think a little bit for themselves, can critically think, can solve problems, that do question and do come up with a better way to do things. Because I said so, it doesn't work very well.
Exactly. And that's one reason why I try to really make sure that I explain the reason behind the rules for the students. And so, I mean, if there's a student that wants to just run out of the classroom, I'm like, you cannot do that. And I also try to really be conscious of the way I say it. I try to say, like, we can't do that because it's not just this one kid that isn't allowed to run out of the classroom. It's everybody. Like, nobody is allowed to run out of the classroom because it is a safety concern. And then if they're like, well, how is it a safety concern? Then I give them examples of like, well, this is what could happen if you run out and we don't know where you are. Like,
you get lost.
So you could get lost. If there's a fire, then we don't know if you're in the school or not. And so then you could like die. I mean, in like, I try not to.
It's an extreme example, but it's that's not even traumatic. It's fairly realistic because especially littler kids. I mean, 8 and younger. I'm not trusting. Most adults are not really easily going to be able to trust unless they're extremely good 8 and under kid to be able to know what to do in an emergency. So if they're not roaming the school all by themselves and something does happen, that could be really bad.
Exactly. And that's where it's like, I try to make sure that my students understand, like, these rules are for your safety and growth. Like,
and there's a time and a place to be out roaming. That's for recess.
Exactly. And well, we also our students have to earn recess because, I mean, you've got kids that have behavioral problems. If we're outside and they just jump a fence, then what am I supposed to do? So they have to earn their way outside. And if they're having a bad day, then we're like, okay, you can move around, and like, we have movement breaks. Which I think that most classrooms at this point have brain breaks. It's just more in SPED classrooms, and there's more movement in SPED classrooms, which I think
seems like a good idea.
Classrooms.
I mean, especially elementary school kids, it doesn't make sense to me to lock them into a desk for 8 hours a day with 1, maybe 2 recesses. And like you were saying, like, you seem to get when we were talking previously, and I'll ask you to go into this, when you do physical activities, your students seem to respond really well to that.
Mm-hmm. And like, there was one kid that he was in first grade. He didn't know his alphabet at all. He was mostly nonverbal, and just showing him letters and going like, this is the sound this makes, that doesn't do anything. So we have to engage the entire body. He had to, I mean, just over and over and over again, take his hand, draw a giant O while saying, "Oh, sounds like ah." And he had to keep doing that over and over and over again, using the biggest, like, as much of his body as he could. And then it started sticking. And then we were actually, we started incorporating even more of his senses by getting scented markers. And so we actually got enough scented markers to where each letter of the alphabet could have its own smell.
Interesting.
Because we were really struggling to, like, we tried having tactile things, we tried having the visuals, and the sound and like everything. And we're like, what do we do? The only sense we have not engaged is the sense of smell. Unfortunately, he was removed from our classroom after we taught one letter, because of a lot of like
custody
stuff and like
family stuff. That's probably a huge contributor to why he was nonverbal and struggling with letters, which is probably why he should have been in your class. Like, your class was where he should have been. That always... but then he went to a different school. So, yeah, and that's where it's like, we wish we could do something, but like, and that's honestly the hardest part of teaching, is seeing what the kids go through at home and not being able to do anything. Yeah, you have a limited amount of power, and there's only so much you can do.
It is the most emotionally taxing part, is like, we love these kids and we would do anything for these kids. And sometimes the parents, I mean, either don't have the resources to take care of them the way that they need to be taken care of, or they don't have the mental ability, because, I mean, sometimes like neurodivergent issues can actually be passed down genetically. And so it sometimes the parent has the same mental problems that the kid, or the mental delays that the child has.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes it even worse.
And they're often not equipped with the tools and know how to, because they're
Right.
struggling with it themselves. They don't even know how to then assist their children with the same issue.
Exactly. And so then it's like, first of all, the learning stops when the child leaves school. Second of all, the it's like sometimes it's the kids not being provided like everything that they need to succeed or anything that, or like I had a student that he came in on Monday and he was all cranky and everything, and then he told us that he hadn't had anything to eat all weekend and stuff like that, and we're like,
oh my God.
and so we have to like seeing that and being powerless against it. I mean, yeah, sometimes there are certain things where we have to obviously report incidents, but then there are other times
CPS moves at whatever speed they move at if they get to it at all. That's a crap situation all around.
Which is also because they are understaffed. But it's the intention of the school system, I think, is good at this point. And the idea of wanting to help every child to the best of our abilities. That's a good intention.
There's nothing wrong with that.
But realistically speaking, we do not have the resources to be doing that. We cannot have an individualized curriculum for every student.
Yeah.
We cannot have 504 plans for half of the students.
What's that a 504, if you don't mind my asking?
Yeah, so 504 is basically if there are any educational accommodations, like, oh, the student can only be testing in small group settings because they have trouble focusing, or the student has to have the option of having their test read to them, so because like they have dyslexia or something and they can't, like it's difficult for them to read, so then you have to actually say the test,
that seems,
or just different things like that.
That one specifically seems like, and maybe I misunderstand, but it seems like fixing a problem that should be fixed in a different way. If the student is struggling with reading the test to them doesn't seem like the correct solution. It would be, why don't we teach them, get it in a I know there's dyslexic friendly fonts. Dyslexic people learn how to read all the time. It just takes the proper approach. So it seems like to me, teaching them how to read would help them a lot and would lessen the burden on the whole system.
Well, and that's the thing is like there are different things. It might not just be dyslexia. It could be any number of things. I know that sometimes they do it for people with severe ADHD who are like not able to focus. It's like, okay, well, if it's read to them, then there's less chance of them, like, their brains wandering off.
And again, it seems like it would be best served to teach them how to do that. Because I know that there are definitely people who have severe ADHD that have been taught how to do things.
Oh, yeah.
Here's a question. Does it seem like, so I agree with you, the intention behind the school system for the people who work in it is good. They want to help people. It seems like the implementation and instead of striving for everybody to reach the same like normal standard of everybody can focus through their ADHD and sit down and study. Everybody can read. The goal from my perspective should be everybody should be able to reach the same, at least minimum standard. But it seems like when a student struggles, instead of giving them more resources and attention to get them to that standard, it's just lower the standard, which doesn't feel like that's good for the student in any way. That's not good for for the whole population, because when people don't succeed, it hurts us all. The more success you have, the more success it brings to the world, which makes my world better.
Well, and that's the thing is, I think that you kind of put it in a more concise way, but that's basically, yeah, that's exactly my thoughts on it is when you, and I have seen this in my students, is their entire lives, if something's hard, then people are like, oh, poor baby, you have this disability. Let's go ahead and like have lower standards for you. And then,
which is a huge disservice. I've seen that personally.
Oh yeah. And then the kid has a temper tantrum, and people are like, oh, what can we do to calm this kid down? What do we do? Do you want candy? Do you want? And so then the kid learns to throw a temper tantrum to get their way. And then they come to my classroom and we're like, no, that's not how it works.
And that's not really, once they're an adult, the world doesn't work that way either. And teaching them as a child a method that the world doesn't really work. Like if you throw a temper tantrum at your job, you're out of here.
Yeah.
I mean, in most jobs, especially if you start throwing things and stuff, like if you start acting like a child at your job, you're probably not going to have a job for very long.
I will say that, I mean, yeah, in most jobs, yes. But there are some jobs that you can get where they are more, like, they do employ people who have emotional struggles and who do struggle with, like, even time management and stuff like that. Like, honestly, that's one thing that I mean, this is a tangent. I'll try to keep it short.
Tangents are fine.
One thing that I love about Home Depot is that they employ people who struggle with time management, people who struggle with social skills. And so there are a lot of people at Home Depot who are autistic or have ADHD or OCD or any number of these things that, yeah, it gets in the way of our job. But management, and this is true of any store that I've worked at Home Depot, is they work with you on that. And it's like, okay, yeah, I see that you're going through some stuff right now. Walk around the building a couple times, calm down.
So they help them adapt to the situation and still continue being productive.
Yes. And there's also things where it's like, okay, yeah, you should not have like started yelling at this moment. Like, we need to talk about that. We need to have a meeting about this, but we'll give you another chance because we understand like that you have this, we understand that you're autistic or that you have these different things.
More difficult, so it's like, but that doesn't mean we're not going to help you become better.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, there is obviously a breaking point. Like if you start yelling at a customer and like, if you start, you know, it's like, there are certain times where it's like, dude, I'm sorry, but like our hands are tied here.
Well, the difference there is what it seems is Home Depot still has standards that you need to meet, but they give you the chance and the help to get to those standards rather than just lowering the standards. Yes.
Now, there are also a lot of issues with that, but that could be another time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
no system is perfect, but that seems like a better approach to still have standards. Just give the people who need a little more to reach them the more that they need.
Exactly.
And don't hold the students who don't need it back. That doesn't make sense either.
And that's what we try to do in our classroom is like, the students are like, I can't do this. I can't do this. And it's like, well, not with that attitude. Like, and so sometimes,
whether you think that you can or you think that you can't, you're right.
You're right. And that's where it's like with our students, sometimes, yeah, they're just trying to get out of having to do some work, you know?
And it probably worked before.
But other times, the student genuinely does not believe that they can do it because the adults in their life are like, oh, well, you have autism, so you can't do this. Or you struggle with, I don't know, just different things. Like you struggle with this, so you can't do this other thing. And not even giving the child a chance to try it. And then in our classroom, we're like, you know what? Let's watch what the kid does. And a lot of times, these children surprise us. Yeah. And like, there's something where a kid looks like they're starting to get like amped up, and we're like, our first instinct is like, oh, I gotta go take care. But then we're like, no, we gotta hold ourselves. We have to hold ourselves back because we're like, I want to see if the kid can calm himself down. And surprise, surprise, these kids, they're so capable of so many things. And like, there was one kid that like at the beginning of the school year, he could barely read like short little words like am or the. And then towards the end of the year, because we built up his confidence and pushed him and told him, you can do this.
Yeah.
And like pushed him even when he didn't want to read. We're like, you're going to read. You're going to do this work. At the end of the year, we were reading as like a class and taking turns reading. And so, yeah, for him, his level was a lot lower. And so we're like, okay, just read one sentence and we'll help you through it. And then he was like, no, I want to keep reading. I want to keep reading. And he read an entire page. And I only had to help him with like 2 words because he had the confidence.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is when we say, oh, no, you can't do it. That is so, what's the word? Like degrading, demeaning. What's the word? What am I looking for?
All of those. It's so detrimental. Because the teachers and parents have more power over what a child grows up to believe than almost anybody else. And I've known really successful people that a teacher told them you're bad at math when they were young, and that belief was in their head 20 years later, and it wasn't true. But somebody in power had told them it was.
Exactly, and that's where that's actually I remember when I was taking a psychology course in college. That's actually a very real thing. Like they actually did tests on that with students who were like at the same level of, I think it was math. I can't remember the specific study, but basically they told half of the kids like, you suck. And then the other half, they're like, oh, you're so great. And then they were at the same level. The kids that they told were bad at math, they got bad at math. The ones that they empowered and said, you're good at this, they got better. And so that's where it's like the power of the mind is amazing. But anyway, yeah. So it's just like we need to believe in our students and hold these students to high standards, and
because they can reach them if you push them there.
Yeah, and there might be some things that an autistic student might not ever be able to do, but why can't we let them try?
Yeah, why not? Why should we assume up front that they can't?
Exactly. It's like, because then you're seeing the label before you see the child.
That's actually the topic I wanted to ask you about is labeling. It seems like such a huge thing in society right now, especially in schools. And from what I can tell, slapping a label on, it almost feels like students would do better, kids, adults, and everybody would do better if we just didn't diagnose autism, ADHD, and slap a label on it, because in so many people's minds, it seems like as soon as you're slapped with autistic, well, now instead of seeing your potential as unlimited, you might be able to achieve a little bit. We'll be lucky if you can speak. And it's like, that's not that's unreasonable, because there's plenty of autistic people that with a little bit of extra effort have been able to speak perfectly. So what is your views on labeling and how that has affected the classrooms?
So my views on labeling, it's not specific to the classroom. I think that labels are very helpful to, when you meet someone or you're in a new situation, our brains are trying to get all of this information very quickly. And so labels can be helpful in understanding like, oh, this student is more likely to be struggling with X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that the main issue is the stigma around it and the or stereotypes and stuff like that.
The
where
assumption.
It's like, yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, if you have autism, it looks like this. No, that's not true. First of all, there's a difference between autism in men versus autism in women, but that's a whole nother topic.
And people present differently with everything.
Exactly.
Like humans are uniquely different. And what it seems like, kind of like what you're saying, is autism can present like, and it tends to present like this in many ways. but very often it's quite different as well.
Exactly. And it's like, I think it's helpful, especially for a teacher, to know if a student has autism, but that should be just in the back of the mind. That should not be like, oh, the student has autism, so I'm just going to have that as how I see the child, instead of seeing a child who is smart and a beautiful child of God, basically. Like, instead of seeing them as a beautiful creation, you see them as a label. And that is where we have issues. And that's where, I mean, personally, I think that in recent years, the awareness of different neurodivergencies has definitely increased. Like, we're getting better about it.
Yeah. It almost seems like the label is, rather than dictating the potential of a person, what it should dictate is the tools you use to help that person. Because I'm not a teacher, but I would imagine the tools you use with a student who has ADHD are probably a little bit different from one who's autistic, which may be a little bit different from the tools you use with a dyslexic student.
A little bit.
You can tailor your bag of tools towards whatever their main barrier is, rather than their diagnosis and label does not affect their potential, just the tools that you may need to help them reach that potential.
Right. And that's where it's like, it can be helpful from a teaching perspective. But at the same time, it's like the definitions are so broad, especially with autism. It's like that could mean literally anything. And so it's like, okay, is this student struggling with social interactions? Is the student struggling with focus? Are they struggling with talking? Or are they not struggling with anything and they're just happen to be autistic? Like,
because that's so oftentimes it doesn't even get you in the ballpark then.
Right, exactly. And so that's where it's like, sometimes it's useful, but very rarely. Like, these are still children with very unique needs. And sometimes we can look up like ADHD forms of blah, or like we can like, knowing that a kid is nonverbal, we can search how to teach reading to a kid who is nonverbal, because that's a whole
but that's a lot more specific, because you can be a kid can be nonverbal for a variety of reasons, not just autism, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. I mean, that could be trauma, simply being introverted, and everybody thinks that they're nonverbal, but really they can talk.
They just choose not to, or they're quiet.
Yeah, it could be any number of things. And so that's where it's like, it really comes down to getting to know the kid. And that brings me back to what I mentioned before, where we do not have enough teachers. And we're trying to be everything to everyone. But when it comes down to it, we do not have the resources to be individualizing every student's education. And so that brings me to the point of, we need more parent involvement. That is one of the
Does it feel like parents just dump their kids at school and expect you to do almost their entire job?
Yes.
Including discipline? Is that something that basically, because it seems across the board that that's a major complaint of teachers, is that the kids aren't learning, they're not even learning like how to behave at home. They're expecting us to do that. And then would you also agree that a lot of the tools teachers may have used to have, like consequences and discipline in their classrooms, a lot of those have been removed because you don't want to piss off the parents?
Absolutely. And one of the things is, one of the major concerns is like, oh, well, you don't want to embarrass the child because that could have a negative impact on their mental health. And I'm like,
other students are going to embarrass them.
But at the same time, exactly. We're like, well, I mean, you don't want to be always like picking out one kid and like bullying, like there's a line between discipline and bullying, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a pretty clear line.
And like embarrassing a child is
rules,
probably not ideal, but the thing is,
right?
learning that certain behaviors probably should be embarrassing is probably useful. Like, I don't mean to use an extreme example, but if you've got, I know like certain kids will like to take off their clothes in the classroom. That should be something you're embarrassed of. And teaching, you maybe not
like that.
specifically embarrassing the student, but teaching them to be embarrassed by certain behaviors, because there's a certain societal minimum of standards that everybody needs to meet, not to be just too weird to be connectable to anybody. So that's something that you got to learn in school.
We also have to teach students, like, if you do this, it like in 10 years or so, like if you do this, you will go to jail.
That too.
We're
consequences.
And we have had to have that talk with our kids before about certain things. We're like, you will go to jail if you do this as an adult.
Do you have an example? If you're comfortable sharing it, you don't have to, but that's a really interesting one.
So this, I honestly, we may or may not have to remove this from the official thing before you. Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, I can cut anything out. I'm going to edit the whole thing. So let me make a timestamp. Cool.
That's why we report. report. Most of our job is paperwork.
Yeah, because you do have to document like when I was in physical therapy, if it wasn't on paper, it didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's and that's where it's like, it's mostly to cover our own butts. You know, like we're not. If something happens where like a kid is freaking out and then we have to restrain them and they get hurt, which we actually have to go through training every year. It's called nonviolent something intervention. I don't know, something like that. Basically, it's like how to, first of all, de-escalate and strategies for de-escalation. And then also, what do you do if a student comes at you in this way versus this way, and how to protect yourself without causing any harm to the student. So we do have to go through training.
Which is a hard balance, especially if they get much older than third grade.
That's not exactly. And so thankfully I work with little kids. So it's like, it's easier to protect myself, but at the same time, it's like the kids can get out of holds a lot easier because they're small.
That
and
you
with
can
my
only
big hands, I'm like,
just because you have to still be gentle to a certain extent. There's only like if an actual adult was attacking you, you would do whatever you had to.
Yeah.
You don't care if they get hurt, but in this case, it's kids, and like
right. Wow.
They're in many cases they're really not trying to hurt you. They're just can't.
Yeah.
They don't have their emotions under control, and they're doing things they otherwise probably wouldn't.
And that's where we have to really it's a great practice in forgiveness.
Oh yeah.
And like,
it's a good point.
Because you cannot let these interactions change how you treat the student. Like, because if suddenly it's like you're treating all the kids like with kindness and stuff, but even if you're treating this other kid with kindness, but they can tell if you're just faking it or if you still actually love them. And
that's a really good point.
Yeah. So you have to genuinely forgive them. Not just saying like, oh yeah, I forgive you, whatever, go back to your desk, shut up. Like,
yeah,
you have to.
That's an interesting point, because I had a conversation with somebody else and I was on the same point as you. I was making the point that even though your actions may seem on the surface friendly and nice, if the intention behind them doesn't match, people can tell. Even if you're an amazing actor, if your intentions behind the action aren't in alignment, it's noticeable.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like kids probably they operate more off feeling, but they can probably feel that.
Yeah, because there's so much happening in your brain. Like, your brain registers so much information that you cannot consciously be aware of all of it. Otherwise, your head would explode. Like,
yeah,
it's the gut feelings we get are based on what our brains observe and all of that. It's just that we're not consciously like aware of that. Because also if we were consciously aware of every single thing our brain is going through, our thought process would be so slow. Like
there's way too much in there.
But anyway, yeah, so let's see. What have we talked about so far?
We've talked about a lot. Like there's a lot that goes on in the school system, and it's an interesting, unique look into the school system and the specific classroom you work in that is so different from a regular classroom. And the things it's interesting to me that the methods in your classroom could be used in every classroom. It's just, again, like you were saying, it's the teachers don't have enough bandwidth or resources or ability to use those tools. Like a 1-on-20, it'd be really hard to teach all the things that you're teaching your students that clearly have a measurable positive impact.
Well, and 1-on-20 is actually a very, very small class size. But
that's insane.
Like the class sizes, it seems like they're getting bigger and bigger every year because, let's be real, more and more teachers are leaving.
Because it appears outside looking in to be a very difficult, unpleasant, and often unforgiving job.
Yes.
Thankless many times.
Yes. And, except for Teacher Appreciation Week, then everybody loves you.
For the week.
But
other than that, I hear a lot of teachers just across the board complain that the parents are always... There's the number of parents that are easy to deal with to not easy to deal with. It's like 80% difficult, 20% decent.
Or it's like you see a child that's like acting in a certain way and you're like, why is this child acting out so much? And then you meet the parent and you're like, that's why. Okay. Now there are some kids that genuinely it's like the parents doing everything they can and they're like, I don't know what to do, you know? But definitely as far as why teachers are leaving, I think that one of the reasons, obviously, the amount they're paid. Another thing is because of how many accommodations they're expected to make for more and more children. And that's the thing. I think we touched on this earlier, but the average attention span of a person now is a fraction of what it was even just in 2000. That's not even that long ago. And
I hadn't thought about that.
And this isn't just an issue with education and the way things are taught. It's also everywhere. I mean, in marketing, marketing's the only other thing I studied, but
just in your daily life, a short attention span affects everything. But like what you're talking about in a classroom, I hadn't even thought about how much harder that would be for a teacher.
And that's the thing, though, is instead of teaching students how to focus, what do? We have all of these apps on the computer that help teach them, which is very useful. Like, we should be using, as we get more advanced technology, we should be incorporating that into education, because that not only exposes the child to technology that they're probably going to be using in their future jobs, but it also it teaches them how to adapt to different situations. And it does teach very useful skills, but it should not be a replacement for teaching. It should be a tool to help you understand, this child needs more help with this specific content. Here's
so you can
another
put them
way
in
to
front of a really high quality that and then fill in the gaps.
Exactly. But what's happening is the district is wanting us to use this app and this app and this app and track their progress in all of these different apps and all of that. And it's like, okay, I get you're trying to help the kids by having this advanced technology, helping to teach them and all of that. But also I have observed, watching the kids working on it, they're trying to keep the attention of the kids by having brain breaks every couple of minutes. They have
every couple of minutes?
Maybe, okay, that's an exaggeration. But still, it's I understand the importance of brain breaks, but let's be real. If you are reading a book with the same information or working on a worksheet with the same content as a video game that's teaching you the same thing, your attention span in the video game, or maybe not video game, but like a
learning game.
Yeah, like a learning game. Yes, it is beneficial because it's teaching the kids in a fun way
and more interactive.
If that's all they're ever doing, then they're not learning to have an attention span, which is helpful because it's easier on the teachers, because then it's like, okay, the kids have been working for 20 minutes. Okay, yeah, but their attention span is still very short. Is it making sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think I know what you mean. It's trying to make everything. I would say even the issue probably stems more from the fact that everything that kids are sitting on electronics all the time, and it's hyper engaging all the time. And so their ability to focus on fairly normal things like reading a book that isn't mega engaging the entire every second of the thing, they're losing that. And then in schools where they could be developing that, because, there isn't as much technology, they're still being pushed right into that hyper engaging where you have to be stimulated the whole time technology.
Yes. Exactly. And even when you're reading a book, there's not any animations between pages. There's not, or between sentences, because that in and of itself is a distraction from the content, which is to keep the kids engaged, because they have short attention spans. And you can see this in marketing as well, we're, as a society, all these different industries, we're trying to incorporate, or we're trying to adapt our strategies to fit a shorter attention span. But that makes the attention span even shorter.
Yeah.
And so it's
things like TikTok, it's like 3 seconds, I think. Because if you're not engaged in 3 seconds, you just swipe to the next thing and the next thing.
Yeah.
And it's constant stimulus with no effort.
Exactly. And that's where it's rather than feeding into this because it's easy, we need to be taking a step back from technology. Because yes, it is helpful with learning, but one of the things that they also need to know is how to have an attention span. Because think about it. We have all of these different things. They're changing all the time. Their mind is going from over here, all of these different things. And then we give them a 4-hour standardized test.
Oh yeah. You're not even preparing for that.
Right. And it's how, of course our kids are going to click, and not actually care.
Yeah. That makes sense. Because nothing they did up to that point remotely prepared them for staring at a screen with no distraction for 4 hours. I hadn't even thought about that, because if you constantly feeding kids, both when they're learning and not, with just a super engaging, and never teaching them how to sit still and focus on a specific task until they produce a result for, because it's a skill everybody needs. Everybody who does any sort of work, if you want to do good quality work, you need to be able to sit down and focus and create something, put work in over a few hours. Otherwise, you're going to be likely mediocre at your job if you can't do that.
Oh, yes.
Or unhireable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in college, imagine going to college and you're in a lecture hall and your professor's teaching, and then you're just zoning off into space. You need to know how to focus, because that's a ton of money that you're pouring into this.
That's a whole other subject. College costs an obscene amount of money.
But basically, it's we by trying to provide all these accommodations, especially this kid has ADHD, they can't focus, so we're going to give them more and more breaks. It's okay.
It's again that labeling and assuming
into it. Exactly. And it's yeah, for kids who need more breaks, yes, kids need breaks. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Everybody needs breaks. Everybody needs time to let the brain rest so that it can grow. I mean, imagine if we just never slept. We would not be able to function.
You wouldn't
It's
live
the
very long.
same thing with our brains. Our brains need time to rest between activities. And
Well,
so, yeah,
I think there's a
brain
decent
breaks
amount of
are
research to
important.
show that like you need a transition activity between two
Yes,
brain intensive things because your brain doesn't just shut off and move it on to the next thing.
exactly. And that's one thing that I think is really good about our classroom is that between every single activity we have a rest time. And we have like this transition time. So that they do their work, and that's also an incentive for them to do their work and stay focused because it's like you don't get your free time until you finish your work.
Yeah.
And so they're like, I want to go play games. It's like, okay, then do your work. Like, once you do
And
your
the
work,
faster
then
you
you can
get it
go
done
play
at a
games.
good quality, the more break time you get.
Right. And that's another thing we've had to teach our kids because they're like, okay, I'm finished. And I'm like, no, you got to redo that. And they're like, but I did it. And I'm like, not very well. Like, I know you can do better. And it's like, well, so-and-so wrote shorter sentences than I did. And I'm like, okay, that's because so-and-so doesn't have the same abilities as you, you know?
Yeah, or so-and-so's just a different development point than you are.
Right.
We
Or,
measure
like I
you
said,
by your capability, not somebody else's.
and that's the thing is it's also really interesting teaching all the way from kindergarten all the way to third grade. We have, I mean, yeah, even kids who are in third grade, they're all on different levels. But then,
Oh,
and
yeah.
some of
Well,
it
every
is,
student's different. That's why it's wild to me that 20 to 1 is a low class number. I can't imagine, like, first of all, every student learns at a different level. 5 of them knew what you were talking about 10 minutes ago. 5 of them are maybe on track with what you're saying. 5 are a little behind and 5 are lost. And now you got
well,
30 students. I mean,
yeah. And that's where it's like, I mean, in elementary school, they have somewhat smaller class sizes, like 26, 28, stuff like that. But in middle school and high school, I mean, especially like middle school, my mom is actually a middle school math teacher, and she's got on the lower end, like 36 kids in one classroom.
how is she
And like
supposed to
8
teach 36 kids at a decent level, especially a subject like math, where people learn at wildly different rates?
And there are a lot of kids that have 504 plans, like what we were talking about earlier, where each of those accommodations has to be met. And that is a legal issue. Like if a student has a 504 plan, it's not just a district issue. It's written in the law. These teachers have to provide these accommodations. And that's where it's like the goal of it is to help the student. But
the implementation doesn't seem to be
speaking,
achieving the goal.
No. And that's the thing is like sometimes it's like not even possible, and it's
especially
just,
for
it's
36 students. Even if 5 of those 36 have this whole extra thing you got to do, I can't imagine how much that must add to the workload. And 5 may not even be an accurate number. I mean, what on average, if you have 36 students, how many of them have accommodations? Is it a third of them? Half of them?
That's where it does actually depend on the district, I will say, and the school, because some districts hand out 504 plans like candy. Other districts actually take it seriously. Like, okay, yeah, you might have ADHD, but it's not negatively impacting your educational success. And so we're not going to give you all these accommodations because you don't need them. And that's the thing is I think that we hand out too many accommodations. And some people are like, oh, no, that doesn't happen because the paperwork is too like severe. And I'm like,
it seems like the easy way out. And if we're being honest, let's be honest. I think most people can agree humans will take the easiest path. And like, unless they have a reason to take the harder path and work through it. But I mean, if you give a human the choice of, I get 2 hours for this test or 1 hour, they'll probably take the 2 hours because I gotta work. Yeah. I can take twice as much time. I mean, don't make the obviously logical choice. If you want people, you have to, from something I've noticed, and maybe you would agree, if you want people to act a certain way, you have to make the better, like the more productive, the more beneficial choice, the logical choice.
Yes.
And I'll use a really extreme example. During like COVID, they had the $600 a week like unemployment incentive. And people were so pissed off that so many people were going on unemployment. But the thing is, if you're making $400 a week, busting your butt, working at McDonald's and getting treated like garbage, and you could stay home and do whatever you want for $600 a week, why the heck wouldn't you stay home and do? It's a difference between like a logical, like if you make the immoral or the wrong choice, the choice that has no logical, like there's if you make the wrong choice, the terrible choice to choose, people are going to pick the easy one that benefits them the most in most cases.
Yeah, I'm glad you said in most cases, because I'm like, there are some people that actually have like a basic sense of like human pride and dignity.
Yeah. But like,
and that's the thing
for the average person working a dead end job for $400 a week and getting $600 a week to stay home and do whatever I want. I mean, that's a choice you shouldn't even, that's not even a choice.
Yeah. And that's where I'm like,
besides the stigma of being on an unemployment, which if we're being honest, doesn't have much of a stigma anymore.
Nope. Which, okay, I can rant. I can go on a welfare rant later.
Yeah, that's probably an interesting subject for a different time.
I guess have a lot of thoughts on that.
Let me sum it up and see if you agree. Here's how I look at the welfare system. It's a good idea, implemented extremely poorly, that doesn't incentivize people to get back on their feet after they've got. Instead of giving people a hand up and standing them back on their feet and then pushing them back out into the world to keep moving, we pull them up, throw them on a couch, and say, don't do anything with the rest of your life. And that's just not a good system.
Absolutely. And like, there are people who want to work. I think a lot of people want to work because there is that sense of human dignity. And it's like, I don't want to just be here for no reason. Like, I want a purpose. And even if that purpose,
the question I'm going to ask you shortly.
Oh no. Even if that purpose is sweeping floors, I want a purpose.
As long as it does something, makes you feel like you're doing something.
Right. And it's
that matters.
Like, most people, I don't think, are fulfilled just having things handed to them.
No.
And so we're really doing a disservice to that person and not treating them like a person. But anyway, and it's really the same thing with education and with giving all of these accommodations. We are not treating them like a person at that point, and we are. It's like,
it's almost insulting when you think about it, because we're just saying you can't achieve anything, so we gotta make it easier. Which is really, if you look at humans on average, humans can do almost anything. The human brain is almost infinitely like malleable and growable. So labeling somebody as unable to do something is a massive disservice to them. It should be insulting.
And that's the thing is, I don't understand how people, I don't think they understand what it is that they're saying when they say, you can't do this. Like, they might be thinking like, oh, well, I'm saving them from the embarrassment of failing. I'm saving them. It's like, no, you are not letting them learn. And that's the thing.
You're taking something away from them.
There need to be fewer accommodations. Like, let's be real. There is a reason to have accommodations. There are students that genuinely need accommodations to be able to succeed academically. But not every student needs an accommodation. And if every student needs an accommodation, then
something else
there's
is
just
wrong.
Something wrong with your curriculum.
Yeah.
Like, exactly. And that's another thing. The curriculum, they want us to teach.
Thank you for watching the Learn From Everyone podcast. I'm Tim, your host, and we are going to finish up this interview in a completely different episode. Regina and I had such a great time talking. We covered so many subjects that we went way past the hour and a half that this show is generally scheduled for. So, to follow up and see what Regina has to say about the curriculum of the school and a whole lot of other topics, catch up with us here in just a few days. That's everything for now. You have a wonderful rest of your day, and remember, you can learn something from everyone, so keep that in mind. Have a wonderful day.